Good morning. Hemshah Chaim Beis, Volume 2, the first third of page 1185, Aleph Kuf Pei Hey. Yeah. So the immediate conversation now and theme is about Adam, this state called an Adam, which we define as a human being, but the truth is, before the actual physical human being, God shaped and created an Adam Elyon, a supernal, a spiritual structure. So Ishtalshlus is not just a bunch of random pieces, Ishtalshlus meaning the cosmic order. It's structured like an Adam, but of course on a spiritual level. So just like a human being is a composite of many different elements, and many ways includes the entire universe in microcosm, so the entire universe, in this case the spiritual universes as well, say the Ishtalshlus, is structured like an Adam. But the Adam itself is like, we know, say the Ishtalshlus, just like you have 10 spheres in Atzilus, and the 10 spheres in Bria, and 10 spheres in Yetzirah, and the 10 spheres are the structure of a human. What is the structure? We know there's right, left, center, Chochma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach, Ched, Yesod, Malchus, which is structured the three columns of like the human structure, which we are created in that image. So each world has its own 10 spheres. So each domain and entity in the cosmic order has an Adam. He's described four that we identified, going from the bottom up, Malchus, as is the Adam and the Merkava in the image of the chariot that the prophet Yecheskel saw. You have that's Adam and Malchus. You have Adam and Zah, which he calls, when it says Adam Stam, the Ma'ir said, we learned in the last page, it goes on Zah Midas. You have Adam and Chochma, that's Adam Arishan, Abi Allah. You have Adam Kadmon, the earliest state is when, right after the Tzimtzum, the Kav, the first so-called domain it creates is Ak, Adam Kadmon, the word Adam, the primordial, the earliest state of an Adam. And that is the four that he talked about. But he's really focusing on the three. So far he's focused on Malchus, Zah, and Chochma, and explained how in each one, what is the role of this Adam state? In contrast to the actual structure of Ishtalshlus, what is Adam? That's the Pnimius. It's the inner dimension, what he called Shema Milagav. Ma is the name of Havaya, Yudke Vovke, as it manifests in number 45, which is the gematria of Adam, state of Bittul, Ma. That's the Ma within all the spheres. As we said in Pasuk Eliyahu, Iyu Shema, the Iyu Erech Atzilus, says Milagav Iyu Shema, from within. So it's the Pnimius. And he explained the Pnimius in Malchus, meaning not just the function of Malchus, but as it's rooted in Chochma and Keser, the letters that are rooted in the highest states. The Adam in Zah is Pnimius Zah, is Hamashpia, the Eris into the Kalim, and that's where he brought the Pasuk Eliyahu, that this refers to the Kav, the Atzmus HaKav, the core Kav. What does it do? It shapes and it irrigates all the spheres. So it irrigates and waters the tree. In this case, the tree is the tree of all the spheres. And that is called Atzmus HaKav, which is like a main channel, a main artery, which then branches off into smaller arteries. He brought another interpretation that the smaller arteries are the root of the energies that manifest in containers. As I understood it, and I still have not looked, actually I was going to look before this class, I didn't have a chance. There's a Maimer in Tafresh Ayin Ches, even though most likely he's not referring to that, but I do know there's one there that talks about this. Let me quickly look at it a second, if it enlightens us at all. This topic of the Tzeneris. But regardless, we'll go to it. Zocher. Just bear with me a minute. It's actually a Zocher Maimer. if you want to know what I'm looking at a Maimer Zocher Tofrei Shayin Ches from the Rebbe Rashab, where I recall there's a longer discussion on the Kav and the arteries, the smaller channels and the larger channels, if I recall correctly. Yeah, page 193. Okay, it's not quick. I have to look up some other sources that he cites. But regardless, getting back to our discussion here, it's either the Atzmus HaKav, or he calls it the Pnimius HaKav, which is, again, Pnimius, the inner dimension of the Kav, which is the Ma of Zoh. Then he says also in Chochma you have Pnimius and Atzmus Chochma, which is the Ma of Chochma. You have Koyach and Ma, Koyach Ma, so that's the Ma of Chochma. Okay.
You're using Atzmius HaKav and Pnimius HaKav interchangeably?
I don't think that's what he's doing here. It's possible, but I think it's not the pshat here, because he says V'al Kain. The Al Kain in the parentheses tells me that based on this Mokem Macha that explains it elsewhere in a little different level, that's why Shema is P'chinas Pnimius HaKav. But I would have to look it up. So I can't say definitively. To me, it appears initially that it's two levels. But regardless, it's definitely not Chetzenius HaKav. It's definitely not the outer. It's definitely a Pnimius Dika level. So the question is Pnimius, Atzmis, or it's interchangeable. Okay. Now, where we stopped, I read a few lines, but now he says, now when you break it down further, he says there's actually three levels of Adam in each Parsuf. In each particular structure, we talked about so far about one level of Adam in each level, the Pnimius. But he says, and I'll read, before I say that, I wanted to just point out, on page 11, at 1040, he actually explains the Tikkun Zeir, the Shakil Ilona, and he also refers to the Pnimius HaKav. If you look at Aleph Mem, the Maimer, the Kairach Maimer, 1040, middle of the page, you'll see, he says, Iyu Shakil Ilona Kamaya Dishtakil Ilona Visraba Bahu Shakya. He says that's the Eirach Kav. And then he goes on to say that twice in the Pasuk Eliyahu we say twice Shakya. He says there's two different levels. If you read there, just to complete the picture, Pnimius HaKav, down below. So it's referring to Chetzenius HaKav and Pnimius HaKav according to, Pnimius HaKav, good. I'm just pointing it out, that it was mentioned earlier. Okay. So now he's going and breaking it down further. He says, V'hinei beprotis, on page 1185, the line begins, Umad Chochma. V'hinei beprotis yesh b'chol patzuf. When you break it down in more specific detail, in each patzuf you have three levels. B'chinas Adam Pnimi, Adam Emtsoi, Adam Chitzeni. So there's, in Adam itself, you have the inner, the Emtsoi would be the middle, and Chitzeni would be the outer. So that if you may recall, when we talked about Kalim, we also had Chitzeni Sakalim, Emtsoi Sakalim, and Pnimius Sakalim. So when you break things down, in general, everything has an inner, an outer, and something in between the two, which is like the middle level. So he says also in Adam you have these three levels. And here's how it works. And as it's known, the Mechin hem Parzuf Gomer b'fnei atzmei. So now I was talking about the Parzuf. Remember I mentioned a Parzuf is a composite of several spheres. So even though you could speak about Chochma as a Parzuf, but generally Mechin is its own Parzuf. Midas Zoh is another Parzuf. Malchus is a Parzuf. And also Keser is a Parzuf. So bottom line is a Parzuf, as I said, is Nekuda sphere, a Parzuf, is a point. There's a sphere, which is an identity of Chochma Bina, and there's a Parzuf. So he says, In general, what you do, moichin is a passive gomer b'fnei atzmei. In other words, it's a self-contained entity. Like when we say the mind is not just one mind. There's Chochma, Bina, Das. There's middle brain, right brain, and left brain. So center brain and right and left. So the moichin, he says, is a passive of its own. Obviously, in a human being, the moichin is not alone. We don't just have a head and a mind. You also have emotions and others. But when you break it down, it's its own structure. Umehem nimshachim, and from the moichin, nimshachim, it extends and it transmits beramach evri haguf, into the 248 limbs of the body, aidei gidei hameach, through the nerves of the mind. So the mind, besides being an intellectual faculty, it's also the central nervous system. So we know the spine originates from the brain. And the spine travels through the gidei hameach, the nerves that originate there, travels to all the parts of the body. And that's why the mind is like that central nervous system, the central control room that controls all the movements, and not only the movements, all the faculties and all the functionality of the body. So God forbid something happens to the brain, it doesn't just affect the brain. It will affect also different parts, depending which, if a person has, God forbid, a stroke, or in any other way, the brain, it will affect other parts of the body because the brain controls different movements and so on. It also affects the breathing, can affect the breathing, the heartbeat. So the brain is not just an independent faculty in that sense. So what he's saying here is that the patzuf of moichin begins in the moichin, and there it draws into all the 248 limbs, meaning the entire body, through the gidei hameich hamispashtim b'chol ha'evarim. The gidim literally means, it could be nerve. A gid is like a channel, like a wire, if you wish, a gid. Hamispashtim, which extend b'chol ha'evarim. Okay. U'kameshikosa b'bir azer al-maimer azal, al-maimer azer, reish pasha teldes. Like it says in Bir Azer, Reish Pasha Teldes, where there he elaborates on this topic. I think in the Maimer I just looked at, I think he also, one second, let me just see something. Give me a moment, please. No, it's a different, no, sorry, it's a different Zeha. Okay, in the parentheses now that Rebbe Rashab is going to explain, I would assume that the language he just quoted is from Biri Azeyar, and now in the parentheses he explains, so what is the three Bechinas Adam in this context? He just said that Bepratis, it breaks into the inner, the middle and outer man, Adam, and we know that moichin extends through the nerves through the entire body. What does that have to do with the three levels of Adam? So he's going to explain this in the parentheses, which tells me that most likely it says in Bir Hazer, but maybe there isn't the details, and the parentheses that Rebbe Rashab explaining what it says in Bir Hazer. That's speculation. It just sounds like that based on the way he's phrasing it. So here's what he says in the parentheses. V'zeu gimel b'chinas Adam. And this is the three levels of Adam. And he's going to explain now. Adam pnimi heina moichin. Adam pnimi, the inner Adam, the inner man, and we're talking now, of course, again and again on spiritual state, which also evolves into the human being on earth, a physical human being, is moichin itself. So moichin is a level called Adam moichin. The Adam chitzeni heim hayevarim, hein hayevarim. And the outer man, which means the outer faculties and functions of the body, or of the Adam, is called the Adam Chitzeni, the outer. The Adam Emtsai, and the middle one, Hein Hagidin, these are the channels, or the nerves, Hamachabrim, that attach, connect, and bind, Umamshichim in Amechin Elayvarim. They connect the mind and they draw from the mind, from the nerves, into the Evarim. So there you have three levels. There's the body itself, the function, the limbs and organs of the body. There's the mind, and there are the channels in between, the Gidei HaMeach, which connect the two and draw the energy and draw the control, basically the driving engine, draw the energy, the direction and guidance of the mind into the body, into the faculties. Interesting way of explaining Adam Primi Emtsai Chitzeni. Okay, that's what he says. Who gamken inyan boser gidin v'atzomis. Okay, now there's another distinction we find in the body. Boser, gidin, and atzomis. That a body consists of flesh. Boser is the flesh. Gidin are the nerves, the veins, basically the nerves that we're talking about. V'atzomis are the bones. So you see three things, the skeleton. So he's saying that these three correspond as well to flesh, gidin, v'atzomis. And now he's going to explain. The grama benuyin al maya, zeu b'chinas hamechin. Grama is another word for garmuhi, for the bones, I believe.
Not the throat? Grama?
Excuse me?
Throat, I thought.
Yeah. The expression grama benuya al maya is from Zohar. Is it? He says that's the level
Grama
of
is like garmoid, that's Amos.
Yeah, I just said the bones. And the bnuya al maya, which means they are made up of water, liquid, the I guess the fluid, because the bones need to, maybe even the marrow. Maybe it's the marrow. It says the grama bnuyin al maya.
Maybe the moisture.
I would have to look up exactly what this means, because it most likely is saying that from the moichin comes the moisture that sustains the bones shouldn't dry up. You need to have them alive. So the bones, in other words, are coming from moichin, which he called before pnimius. The basar, the flesh, is the outer dimension, is the outer skin and flesh. The gidin, hey mechabrim, hatzomes va'basar. And the gidin, again, like he said before, the nerves, they connect the bones and the flesh. Like it says elsewhere. So the truth is, I want to look it up before I explain it. But essentially what he's saying here is that there are three levels in Adam, what he calls moichin, gidin, and the evarim, the mind, the nerves, and the fat and the limbs. And he says it also corresponds to the bones, the nerves, and the flesh, which are also these three levels. Atzamis relate to the moichin, which again, I want to look up what this expression exactly means. It could be the bone marrow, that maya is mayim in general. So benuya al maya, benuyin al maya, that the bones are built al maya on the waters of moichin.
Would it mean maybe the skull is covering the brain?
I don't think so.
No, not the skull. The brain itself.
Is the skull.
Comparatively, not the skull.
What?
The brain is the maya, not the skull. The brain is the maya, not the skull. Compare the brain to basar. It's
no, it's not. It's no. So we have three levels.
The material of brain is a different material.
Okay.
So what is the gidim in physical body? What is the tafkid of gidim?
Well, you just explained it. If you don't have nerves, you don't have the brain able to send instructions to the body. Very simple. They carry the instructions of the mind. The
gidim are not nerves.
That's what they are here, nerves. Yeah. What do you want to call them?
But
Yeah, what would you call the Gidim?
In physics. Okay.
Veins?
Tendons.
I think here Gidin are the nerves, in my understanding. But when they translate usually Ramache Varim Shasa Gidim, they say 248 limbs and 365 sinews, I think they say. Sinew. But here it seems to me that it's the nerves because he's talking about how from the brain travels to all the limbs. What would be traveling exactly? The muscles? A tendon is a connector between the tendons are connectors between joints. So I'm not sure it means tendons, ligaments. Anyway, that's my understanding of it. But again, I will look it up more in detail.
But
The
yeah, you
Gidya
just
general-
described ligaments. Tendons is between
Ligaments.
a muscle and a bone, you know.
Right. But then how does it mean that the mind sends to the rest of the body is the ligaments or the tendons? To me, I think it's the nerves. But I will look it up and get back to you. But I think that's what it is.
It's taking to Ayin Beis. המשך עם בייס חלק ראשון. עומד שין א'. פנחס
I
Ayin.
can hear you. You're echoing. What did you say? Shin Aleph in volume 1?
Volume 1, שין א', yeah. In middle of the minor Pinchas.
Ahmed Shin Aleph or Perik Shin Aleph?
It sounds like Pinchas Tov Resh Tov Ayin Resh Gimel. I believe it's page שין א'. Os Kuf Min Gimel.
Yeah, the top of page Shin Beis from the Zayar, he says that the Atzmus Meira ala Etzem Kedem Shemispashet U'Kamesha B'Zoyar Kameshkos B'Zoyar Grama B'Nuin Amecha the Iu Maya. Okay, but he doesn't add anything really much more in Havanas Advarim. Just say that it comes from the Mechin. I'll look it up. I will look this up. We can continue. Okay. So he's broken down now the Adam into 3 levels, and he just explained it that it's Mechin, Gidim, and Evadim, or it's Atzomis, Gidim, and Bosar, which correspond essentially because Atzomis clearly are somewhat bound and rooted in the Mechin. Okay. Now he's going to continue explaining what this Adam, what its role is. Remember, we know it's Pnimius, but what exactly does the Adam accomplish in each level? I'm just wondering, the fact that he brought us 3 levels sounds like it's all in Mechin. In other words, the Mechin, before he said Chochma is Adam. Now he said the Mechin itself is basically Adam Pnimi. I mean, it could be what he's saying here is that even though Adam, level of Adam is in Chochma and in Zah and in Malchus, he doesn't say it explicitly, but maybe he's hinting that those are the 3 levels. Mechin is Adam Pnimi, Zah Midas is Adam Emtsai, and Malchus maybe is Adam Chitzeni. But he doesn't say it explicitly. So I'm not sure if I could say that. Also, he said, the Kidud, the Mechin and parts of Gomer B'fnei Atzmai. Why did he make that statement? And from there it goes to the Varim, the Gidi HaMeach. Okay. Let's continue on. I'm going to look up and see if I can find more information to help understand this section here. Klolos inyan Adam. However, the general inyan of Adam, what is the real so-called function and role of Adam? Hu inyan hiskalolus. So now he's introducing another word. Till now he said Adam is pnimius. Milagav iu shema, the inner dimension. Now he's adding and saying that the inyan of Adam, close in Adam, is iskalus. The word iskalus means, in English, interconnectivity. When you have several things working together, or several ingredients, or several elements or components, when they work in a symbiotic way, meaning they all complement each other, they work together in harmony, that's iskalus. Remember, we learned toihu is pirut, is the opposite of iskalus. Toihu is a bunch of different entities that are fragmented and they don't work together. Like just in a simple way, you bring together a team, let's say to a project. If they're working together and everybody knows their role and everyone knows how the others complement each other, that's iskalus. They all work together and they also, each one has the other one within it. In other words, they don't just work together and tolerate each other, but they actually, each one encompasses the other in a full harmonious and symbiotic way. In Toyu, Chochma and Bina don't work together. And Das, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, a bunch of Nekudas, that's why it's called Elam Nekudim, a bunch of dots of different entities. So Iskalus, the human being, manifests Iskalus, a healthy human being. The key thing, it's made up of many parts, but they all work together, one function, one body, one entity, all working together despite its multitude and diversity. That's essentially what an Adam is. Hiskalus. I'm sorry, I skipped a line. Like the pasuk said, God created them, male and female. Male and female, he created them. Vayikra Shemam Adam, and he called their name Adam. Harihu Hischabrus Beis Dvarim. So the pasuk, if you read the pasuk literally, what does it say? Zachar and Nekeva created them male and female, so it's two entities, and called them one name, Adam, because Adam is basically the joining of two different forces in general, the male, female. And we know before God separated them, they were like one entity, an androgynous creature. Du partsufim is the expression. So basically, from the pasuk, the Shem Adam is not a one singularity; it's an entity that combines two. It's the connecting of two things. In this case, Zachar and Nekeva. Like it says in the Zohar, Gufa v'nafshe kechada ikra Adam. The body and soul as one, that's called a human being, Adam. In other words, an Adam is not just a soul, a spirit, a nefesh, and not just a guf, a body. It's guf v'nafshe kechada. If you want to call a person a human being, it has to be a combination of body and soul. So he's building a case now to explain that the inyan of Adam is iskalulus, which of course is going to come back to explain Rabbi Yehuda's words, Ubara Adam al Kula. So first he established that Adam is a central force in all of Ishtalshlus. And what force is that? Pnimius. It's the inner dimension. Shema, in every level. Now he's saying this Shema, this Pnimius, creates Iskalus, because that's the very nature of Adam is Iskalus, not a singular entity. It's many different things that come together. So now he started with two, male and female, body and soul.
Is he implying that that Adam through his kalulus is sorry, I had the word, so interconnecting or synthesizing all the spheros together in some way to bring the or comes from Prit Simtsum is one I don't know united force energy, and then it gets through tzimtzum, it gets differentiated. I'm wondering if he's implying here through his kalulus that Adam puts them back together, and that therefore is able to draw down from Or Ein Sof, as we were saying, that man is above Atzmus and above Bia.
Well, we're just the beginning of the discussion. He's not going to imply, he's going to say it explicitly as we learn it further. Good
guess, huh?
So we don't have to speculate. It's going to be very clear. He's going to explain exactly that in much more detail. So I would just, that's what we're learning now. He's beginning this. He's going to spell it out. Okay. Ukiyadua, the Adam Meira al Hiskalus, that the human, the Adam, I should say, not human, Adam indicates on Hiskalus. That's what Adam, when you say Adam, it's Meira al Hiskalus. So, Kamesha Kosa be'erech ba'abir de v'hanif. As it says at length in the beer of Vahanif, I think the Vahanif is the Maimer and Emor in Likutei Torah, if I recall correctly. And it's based on the idea, I mentioned this when we first began learning the subject matter, that the Adam is made up of all parts of existence, because the Adam is the one that's the central force to unite them all. Like we see that the Adam encompasses within himself Madregas hayesa elyenis, levels, the highest levels, umadregas hayesa tachtenis, and the lowest levels. Like it says elsewhere. So the Rebbe Rashab is speaking pretty briefly here, but he's making the case essentially that Adam is about bringing together, creating, synthesize a good word, a harmony amidst diversity. Okay. So now the Rebbe Rashab is going to explain the connection to what he said earlier, that the Adam is pnimius, not chesenius. So he says the Iskalus comes specifically on the inner dimension, because the inner dimension, he's going to explain, recognizes the inner point of it all. Like I mentioned, when you build a house, the outer part of the house, every room is a different room. And the electricians and the plumbers and the bricklayers, everyone has a different role. It's when you know the pnimius of the house and its purpose, which is the role of the Adam, then the Iskalus comes together because you see it as one entire entity instead of many different parts. So he's going to explain now how Iskalus and pnimius go hand in hand. Iskalus suba pnimius dafke. And the Iskalus is specifically on the pnimius dika level. That's where the Iskalus is seen, and also that's where it's drawn from. Because the limbs, the human, talking now the Ivarim, let's take on a human physical body, physical human. The Ivarim b'chitzeni yusam, the limbs on their outer dimension, the surface level of the limbs, they are different and separate from one another. The eyes are one thing, the ears another, sound, sight, the brain, the mind, the heart, the arms, the legs, and so on. So when you look at it from a point of view from the outer dimension, it's a bunch of different parts. But he makes an exception. Even on the chitzenius level, there is one faculty that does connect. Levad kava amtsoi, except the kava amtsoi, for example, the spine. So even on the outer level, the spine is a connector between the mind and the rest of the body, and the mind and the functionality that all the nerves that come from the spine, the spinal cord. And the same thing is, like when you speak Kavam Tsoi, is the middle rod, so to speak, that holds up the entire structure. So the outer dimension of the Ivarim are all separate from one another, except the Kavam Tsoi. Shaboy, Shemiyuchad. The Kavam Tsoi within the body, within the outer the limbs, that is miyuchad. That is a connecting force. Commission is barley il, as we learned earlier, as was explained earlier, umavur b'malkam acher, and it's explained elsewhere. V'yesh l'kol echad ve'echad, and to each specific limb and organ, every part of the body has its own particular function. Hayad lichtev, the hand that writes to write, varegel lahalech, and the leg to walk. So when you talk about chitzenius, each one has its own particular role. Vahischabru shalahem, and their connection and their unification and their synthesis and complementation, hu mitzad ha'pnimius dafke. That's due to the pnimius. In other words, if you didn't have a conductor, so to speak, of the symphony, there would be a lack of harmony. So there's an inner dimension that basically tells all the parts of the body that you're part of one entity and you need to work together and coordinate. So hypothetically, take away the pnimius, you just have a bunch of different forces. You need something that is the pnimius that connects them all. The kamoi kain hu lamaila. So just as it is in the Adam Lamata, just as it is in the human body below, the same thing is Lamaila, in Ruchnis, in the spiritual dimension of Adam. That what? That the Iskalus is the inner dimension of Zah. Now, why does he mention Zah? Because Zah is usually the center of the human being, is the heart, the emotions. But the bottom line is, he says, is the Pnimius of Zah, not the Chetzenius. That's where you connect. It connects all the different faculties or the different emotions. Uboy v'al and there within it, v'al and through it, nase iskalas v'yiskashus gam b'b'chinas chitzenius zah. So in the pnimius of zah, the pnimius dimension, like it is in the body, in it and through it, causes iskalus, interconnectivity, and iskashus, and a connecting and binding, also in the outer dimension of Zah. That's what Adam, Hiskalus, does on the level of Pnimius. So the Pnimius creates the Hiskalus. V'nimtza. So we derive from this. So what do we learn from this? What is this V'nimtza? And therefore, V'nimtza. From this we learn, or we derive, the Ika B'chinas Adam, Shema, that the primary level of Adam, which is Shema, remember Ma Adam, Melagav, the same gematria Ma, Hu B'chinas HaPnimius Shezo Ha'esa Hiskalus. So the primary thing of Adam is the level Pnimius, that from there, Shezel, that is what creates the Hiskalus. So it's Dafka the Adam that creates this interconnectivity and harmony and synthesis. So then why do you call the person Adam even on the outer level? We also call the outer limbs. Remember we said the limbs are Adam Chitzeni, but it's called Adam. So he says, so even though Adam is a scholus, which comes from previous, but liyashe scholus ugam b'chitzenius, since it causes that the scholus should also be in the outer dimension. What he's saying is that when you look at the outer dimension alone and you don't have the pnimius, they could be separate. But because the pnimius affects also the outer dimension and causes that the limbs, not just the inner limbs, but even on a physical level, the arms and the legs work together and they all coordinate with each other. That's why that's why also the outer dimension is called with the name Adam. So he answers that, he's basically preempting the question, if Adam is Pnimius Iskalus, why is the outer dimension called Adam? Because the Iskalus affects also the outer dimension. All this is, of course, building the case for what Adam is going to accomplish and say the Ishtalshlus in the context of the worlds and their unification. Remember, V'yadaita Yem Hashemayim Emalvel Eretz Metachas, the Zoya, Rabbi Yehuda, which we'll get to shortly. But he continues a little more discussion on this matter. And at the bottom of the page, you're going to see that he's going to explain Rabbi Yehuda's words. That's at the bottom. So we have a section to go here. So now he says like this. But before I continue, any questions? Okay. But before we continue, let me give a little introduction here. As I mentioned yesterday in the previous classes, it's very clear when you read this, you see how different the language is than it was just a few pages ago. A few pages was much more explanation, much more elaboration, especially when we talked about das Ayin and das Tachten and the Ayin. A lot of explanation. Here, far more dense and far briefer. Everything is very brief. And it's jumping from one subject. I mean, it's not jumping, God forbid. I mean to say, he's moving quickly from Adam to Pnimius to Iskalulus, the higher Adam, the lower Adam, the middle Adam. And now Shema, he's going to talk about Shema. So my understanding of what's happening here is that Rebbe Rashab obviously feels it's necessary to bring this into the picture because we need to know what the role of who creates the unity of who creates the unity between the higher and the lower, which Rabbi Yitzchak did not fully explain. He just said that it's there and is the koyach of Ein Sof that has the power to unify, but who actualizes it? So the Rebbe Rashab is explaining, but since these are topics that he's addressed in other places, you see how many times he said muvur b'makam acher? I count, quite a few. Whenever there's a lot of makam achers, means he's telling you this top subject is elaborated upon elsewhere. You don't see it always. Sometimes he says kamosh is bar le'il. So the Rebbe Rashab is hinting to us what he's doing by saying kamosh koser makam acher, meaning this subject, I'm just briefly mentioning it to you, but it's discussed more at length elsewhere. And that's why some of this is difficult to unpack without looking it up elsewhere. But what he's going to do now is one more piece like this. And there, actually, if you go back to around close to the end of, 2/3 through volume 1, you'll find a long discussion about Shema. So I just want to say a few words about it that will help us understand what we're going to read now. Till now, he just said Adam is Gematria Ma, 45, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. And he said Ma is Milagav, meaning Ma is the inner dimension. But he didn't really explain what Ma is. Just to give a little more words to help understand this. At the end of the day, what really creates Iskalulus is the Pnimius, but there's another word that he didn't use yet. But back in volume 1, he used that length. That Ma means Bittul. Bittul. When you have many forces at work and there's no Bittul, there will not be Iskalulus. Because as he explained back then, they will either compete with each other or actually even oppose each other. Like he said, the problem in Toyu is two things. It doesn't tolerate, one entity doesn't tolerate another. And number two, one entity does not receive from another. There's no give and take. There's no interaction. Whole thing with Midas Daim, Shali Shali, Shalach Shalach, if you remember. If you don't remember, it's in volume 1 at length. So there was a long discussion, I'd probably be almost 50, 60 pages on what Bittul does. The world of Tikkun, on the other hand, like he said here, the world of Tikkun creates Bittul. There's Bittul. Once there's Bittul, so one entity is not completely self-contained ego and all about me. It will listen to another, it will tolerate another, and more than that, it will work with another. There'll be coexistence and cooperation, and he spoke there actually many levels of this coexistence, to the point of total harmony and synthesis that you can't even distinguish between them because they're working so much as one unit. When you look at a healthy body, if you didn't know better, you think it's one force. Everything is coordinated. Everything is working with each other. And then when you suddenly recognize, 1 second, there's hundreds and hundreds of different limbs and organs and millions of different systems and cells and so on, trillions, 35 to 75 trillion cells, you suddenly realize, 1 second here, how they all working together so smoothly. So the point is that Bittul is a key to understanding Pnimius and understanding an Adam and the force that ultimately creates Iskalus. So Shema, the name itself, the word Ma, means Bittul. Ma, v'nochnu mo, what? It refers to Bittul, a type of state of a sense of awe in the presence of something greater than you are. So when the Evarim or all the entities in the Shtalshlos have Bittul and Ma within the premise of them, which is the level of Adam, that's when they work all together in a completely unified fashion. Though they remain distinct entities, but you have Bittul. That's why the Bittul that's introduced into any Aveda is not eliminating or annihilating any entity, is the harmony within diversity. So the purpose of existence is permeating every detail, and no matter what detail it is, even if it's different functions, they all work together as one. Now, he's going to explain now that Shema, again, just like Adam, is also all over in Seder Shtalshlos. Because in each level, you need to have this Pnimius. So we have the word Pnimius, Hiskalus. I'm using the word Bittul, even though he doesn't say it yet explicitly, but it's pretty much implicit, especially when you learn the previous Maimorim. But it also helps understand the picture that's developing here, what the Adam accomplishes, brings that Bittul into existence. Okay. So now he says like this. Actually, he's going to say it now. He's going to say Ma Bittul. I see. So now he's going to say like this. Just like we said, there's an Adam in each level. He says, Val derech zeh yesh b'chinas Shema hakloli. Same thing with Shema. There's the Shema hakloli. The general Shema, when you say the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei in its permutation of 45, Miloi Alfin, which means the Hey is an Aleph, the Vav is an Aleph. So Yud Vav Dalet, as we said, is 20. Hey Aleph, Vav Aleph, Vav, and Hey Aleph. When you write that all that out in the written form, not the spoken, you add up 45, that's Ma. So he says there's a Shema HaKloli, an all-encompassing Shema. For who's Shema the Abba? That's the Shema of Chochma, of Abba. Remember we said Abba Allah, Koyach Ma. So when you're talking the spheres, which is the first sphere and which is the one that manifests Bittul? Chochma. Like we learned earlier from chapter 35 in Tanya in the Hagah, Hu levadei ve'ein zulosei. With the Alter Rebbe writes, Shemaiti Mimei, I heard from my teacher that Chochma manifests Ein Sof, Hu levadei, he alone, ve'ein zulosei, and no other. So Chochma recognizes is the ultimate Bittul, and that's why it introduces Bittul into all the spheres. So that's a Shema HaKloli. Okay. Ulamayla Yeser, and higher than that, meaning higher than the 10 spheres, higher than Atzilus, is B'chinas Shema Da'ak. There's a level of Shema and a higher level in Adam Kadmon. Remember we said Adam Kadmon, Chochma, Zah, Malchut. So he's now going back in the primordial man. There's also a Shema. What is that Shema called? V'hu Shema HaChodosh. That's called the new Shema. Why is it called new? That's what he explains in the end of volume 1 at length, because it's rooted in levels that are higher than Ma and Ab, and a new dimension emerges. That's why it's called Shema HaChodosh, as he explains there at length. So we have now Shema Kloli, he's calling in Chochma, he's calling it Kloli, and in Ak it's called Shema HaChodosh, because it's the first new entity after the Tzimtzum. The B'chinas Shema Kloli, Oisei Skalus, V'Skalus V'Schabrus, B'Cholus Ha'Ishtalshlus. The Shema Kloli, which you now call Chochma, is what causes the interconnectivity and that connections in the general cosmic order. Ad the B'chinas Malchus, all the way to the level of Malchus, which is the end of the spheres, that enters into Biyah. Shenikra Gamkein Adam, which, as we said earlier, Malchus is also called Adam B'chinas Ma. I'm sorry, Gamkein Adam. Yeah, Shenikra Gamkein Adam B'chinas Ma Oisa Chibur V'Iskalus Atzilus and Biyah. So just like Chochma, or in this case, Shema Kloli, creates a connection through all the Seder Shtalshlos, all the way to Malchus. So Malchus too is called Adam, which creates a connection and an interconnectivity of Atzilus with Biyah. Liyaz gam hagili b'b'chinas Biyah. That the Gili should also come into Biyah. Remember, Al Milah, Al Mitata. Malchus is the one that does that. That is the bridge. So he's saying this. So we have here, he's actually spoke about 3 levels. Adam Kadman is a Shema HaChodesh. Chochma is a Shema HaKloli that draws, that connects, and all the way into Malchus, which then connects it further. Remember the Kav that pierces the Parsa, the partition, and connects it also to Biyah, that the Gili should also come into Biyah. So you see already, he's talking the language that Adam is doing all of this. V'hu liyis. Now he's explaining what I said before about Bittul. And why does Shema have this power? V'hu liyis. The Shema b'chinas ha-Bittul. Because the Shema is due to the fact that Shema is the level of Bittul. B'chinas hanoches atzmusei. That you set yourself aside. If you don't set yourself aside, if you don't have any humility, and it's all about you, there will not be hiskalulus. So Shema is Bittul, hanoches atzmusei means you put yourself aside. The self entity, the identity does not dominate, it sublimates itself, it quiets itself. Ubittul hu keli legili ein sof keneda. And Bittul, that selflessness, the suspension of self, the hanoches atzmusei, that's the keli. That's the container for the divine revelation of the infinite divine as it's known. So this is like the punchline that Adam, Pnimius, Shema has his Bittul, and that's why it creates this iskalus. Valkain, and due to that, B'china Shema, B'kasher u'mechaber u'mamshich, Shema binds and attaches and connects, u'mamshich, and draws down Gili Ein Sof Behem, Gili Ein Sof Behem, Gam B'Biyah. What's the Behem? Behem is interesting word. Behem, does he mean the Kalim of Malchus? Because it doesn't say Ba. Gili Ein Sof Ba. Gili Ein Sof Behem. I'm not sure what the Bohem is referring to be honest. At first, my initial thought was the Ageres HaKedesh, where he said, Hakav Bekeya Parse Imohem, that together with the Kelim of Atzilus, of Malchus of Atzilus, they go into Biyah, the Kav travels and pierces the Parse. So Imohem would be like Bohem, but I'm not positive. But regardless, what he says, because Shema is Bittul, on all levels, including Malchus is also Adam, that's why it draws it 3 things, he says. Mekasher, mechaber, u'mamshich. It binds, it connects, and draws down the revelation of the infinite divine also into Biyah. V'ima yes, and even though she'ena dema habitl de shema de Biyah l'shema da'atzilus, okay, so now he's qualifying. Okay, fine, it draws it down. But the fact is, there's still a difference. So even though there is a difference between the Shema, as it is in Biyah, to the Shema as it's in Atzilus, and the Rebbe Rashab says, as we shall explain with God's help, nevertheless, through this process, you have the transmission of the Eir V'Agili, B'chinas Gili Eir Atzmi. You still have the Eir Atzmi. Remember we said, we don't just want a reflection, we want the Eir Atzmi, the actual essence of the Eir. So basically he's saying 2 things. There is a distinction between the 2 worlds, Atzilus and Biyah, but the Eir Atzmi has now been introduced due to the Bittul, that creates the scholars from the Pnimius of Adam. Okay. I'm going to stop here because there's a parenthesis, but if you look right after the parenthesis, he says, and this is what Sha'amar, Rabbi Yehuda said, that the Abara Adam al Kula Shema, which creates the Bittul that we're discussing right now. I'm going to stop here because the parenthesis requires a little more focus. But bottom line is, he's now explained the process, what Adam is all about. The Adam is about inner dimension, about Shema, which we know as Bittul, which creates a skalus and connects. It's a connector. Because of its Bittul, it's a connector between the highest levels to the lowest levels. And that's why the Adam encompasses all these levels. And all the way into Biyah. So though there's a distinction, but you still have the Atzmi, the core energy. So we're going to stop here, but I'll stop for any questions. So I'm close to the bottom of page 1185. And I don't want to rush it. I mean, I would read it, but I don't want to rush it because it needs to be explained. Any questions, my friends?
It seems obvious here, but just I'm asking if you can confirm that this is from where we get the notion that if we want to have a connection with the Eibishter, if we want to bring the Eibishter into our lives, and have a relationship with the Eibishter, that we have to have Bittul, and only through Bittul can we infuse ourselves, or I guess bring out the divine, the Elokus within us, so to speak. Is
Yes.
that, as a practical matter, fair to say?
Absolutely. That's absolutely correct. Yeah.
Thank you. I love it when you bring it to Chassidus applied, like your website says.
Try my best. There's more to apply. There's still more to talk about, but that's absolutely correct. On a personal level, it all comes down to the bittul that each of us exercises in our avodah, everyone in their own way. Because bittul is the key that opens up great higher doors. Take away bittul, it's like a cup that's filled, can be filled. You have to empty yourself in order to bring something more into it. It's the basis of everything. It's the basis of love. What does the Alter Rebbe say? We learned it yesterday. The Chitas, Perek Lamed Beis, Tanya. He says the foundation of love is possible only if you make your spirit primary and your body secondary. The nefesh, that's essentially bittul. If there's no bittul, there's no love, no true love. It's selfish love. Because as long as you are full self-contained and self-interest, and it's all about you or me, there's no room for anything more to bring into the picture. So there's no growth. Bittul is the secret to all growth, all movement, every journey, love, relationships, and obviously a relationship with God. Ein anivuhu yichelim. What's the lashon there? B'kfifa achas. God says about an arrogant person that him and I cannot reside under the same canopy. There's no room for both.
Shkor, thank you very much.
What?